One of the hats I wear in the Center for Humanities Research and with the IATSIBA lab particularly is a co-conspirator in the one of three platforms that are centered in the center. You all know the fantastic puppet project in the basement as you enter the building. You may know about the documentary film program, and then there's a third conversation in this center, which is around the sonic and sound. And so today we have the musicians and the artists behind me, particularly, the leader of the trio here is Mohammed Dawjee, and for a number of years, or over a period of years, we've had conversations with persons such as Mohammed Dawjee and several others, some of them are in the room here, around the ways in which the sonic might be a way to think with the project of what the CHR is engaged with. And I think especially the session this morning, thinking about the place of the sensory in this critique of apartheid is particularly pertinent. What excites me particularly about today's performance in the context of the prompt for this exhibition and for this conversation in the wake is the opportunity to think about the slave as a protagonist in a sonic rendition of this of history. What does it mean to employ or deploy the slave into this landscape, into the kinds of conversations about the sensory? And so Muhammad was asked to respond to that prompt, and what we're going to be left with, and I think we'll pick up on it in the conversation. I will invite my colleague Lindelwa, Dalamba after the intervention that you're about to experience, is to think about what are the limits of such an exercise. And I'll speak a little bit more about what it means, particularly reflecting on my own work as a curator and I guess, an activist inside of the sonic space of a museum, of a different kind of museum. It's always a question I pose about the opportunities and the limits of the museum as a space for this kind of work. So I won't go into any more. Please welcome the Mohammed Dawjee and the trio. I'll introduce, sorry, I'll do that after the intervention. I think I just want to reflect something of the caution that Mohammed has given to us, that he doesn't want to think about this as a musical performance because of what that immediately does is closes off on the possibilities of what an intervention like this would raise in a context like a conference or a workshop about slavery. So let's think, or let's engage with what can't be translated into the spoken word, but still think of it as a form of thought. And let's see what emerges after this. So Mohammed Dawjee and the trio. Lilivan Gangat on the drums. Sean Sanby on the bass. And Muhammad Dawjee on the saxophone. So we're going to have a conversation, and you're welcome to jump in as members of the audience. This is Lindelwa Dalamba, who can introduce herself in a moment. But maybe I'll just make one or two introductory comments just to, in a sense, try to frame some of the elements of what's happened now. I'm interested in this kind of work because I guess my project has been to think about jazz from this place in the world. And it's initiated out of an attempt, a broader attempt at restitution in the city of Cape Town through working with particularly memory, the work of memory, and a museum in Cape Town called the District 6 Museum, but also work beyond that, in which the problem of restitution, or rather, let's put it this way, jazz has always been identified as part of as something that is in conversation with the work of restitution, because it has been such an important part of the expression of communities struggling to humanize themselves in an urban context in South Africa. So how do we become part of the cities and the life of an industrializing country in the wake of slavery? And in that work, there is, and I think one might recognize it in some of the what was going on stage here, there's a kind of self-reflexivity in the music that lends itself to that struggle for restitution. Because it's not only jazz that does that work, of course. Reggae music, hip-hop, there's a whole legacy of slave life worlds around the globe where people have deployed sound and music in particular, but not only music, to wage that struggle. So in this context, it's about, my personal struggle has been to think about how to speak about jazz, not just the fact that we have jazz. Of course we do, and if you're an insider, you know, you learn the language So you hear people responding and emoting and making noises in response to what's going on stage. That's part of the conversation. That's part of the listening experience that we all become acculturated to. But what does it mean to have a discourse that enables us to take ownership of the conversation, of the ways in which we represent and we make sense? In other words, what is the public conversation that we're allowed to have, that we were not allowed to have in the past? And I'm saying all of this because when I was a young curator, the struggle was to find a language that did not collapse into apartheid's language. It was a very difficult thing to do. So I'm going to leave that there as I guess proposition number one about how we come into this and why it's important, profoundly important, to connect this kind of intervention to the idea of the wake of slavery, because we're only beginning to, in a sense, find and campaign or work for restitution. There is one register of that work which we are familiar with in the museum world, which is around the restitution of the proceeds of plunder. And there's a debate about what that means and how one might gain access or gain traction to that. Especially, again, I'm going to refer back to the first conversation today and the idea of what restitution might mean in a conversation about the sensory, about a critique of apartheid. The other part of the problem, and then I'll stop, that I've posed is, or I've been thinking about is, that aligns very nicely, I think, with the prompt for this workshop and for the exhibition, and that is the idea of something that is not only specific to Cape Town or to any other locality, but the fact that this work is global. And what about it enables us to speak? So I know that Lindelwa's work, for example, is a critique, is in a sense trying to step into a critique of the limits of nationalist thinking around conversations about jazz, and she can go into that. So I'll leave us, at least my initial prompt, with those two thoughts for us to engage with in response to what these beautiful human beings and artists have given us.
Thank you, Valmont. Is this the working small? Yeah. Thank you so much, Valmont. We are particularly thankful because we do know, of course, that we are in the midst of Eid al-Adha, the festival of sacrifice. So we thank all those who took time out in the midst of this important time to be with us in a space that has its own kind of sacredness and importance that does not undercut the seriousness of Eid al-Adha. What Valmont is saying might be expanded, perhaps. We didn't prepare notes, so you'll forgive us. We're improvising with words which somehow are less forgivable than music. So let's give it a go. But when Valmont talks about the globalness of this music, I'm reminded, of course, of a classic paper by A.A. Mensah called Jazz the Round Trip, which reminds us of jazz's global circulation, not in the usual ridiculous Africa first, America next, but actual circulation that can't be accounted for in those simplistic ways. It's forgotten. It was published in Jazz for Shang, I think in the early 1970s, but it's well worth returning to as we think jazz post-nationally, even though we might still speak of South African jazz. Second, as the music was going on, and in light of this conference, I found myself remembering Tsitsi Tangaremba's third iteration of her trilogy, from Nervous Conditions to the Book of Knots, the third, of course, being this mournable body, with us remembering that not all bodies can be mourned, and what it actually means also, in addition, is all additive to speak of in slavery's wake and what we may mourn. When the music started, its resonating chord figured in the double bass that reminded me of Uadi, Umkhube, Umakweyana, although it insisted on its modernity. It was not lost to me that it was not the walking bass signaled somehow what we might call the enigma of arrival. When Mohammed started vocalizing, I was reminded of Kukuhlabela, announcing oneself as one arrives. And I thought of Amiri Baraka's Slave Ship, the play, and the compositions that were inspired by it. And I thought of Sunny's Blues. And I thought of all these things, but I didn't get lost. I still remained in South Africa. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that the beginning of this conversation we heard today, in its hesitance, in its softness, in its absence of the walking bass, somehow might remind us of how dialogue starts, how we feel our way towards each other before we can speak to each other. And I think that's important because one of the things that jazz does, as Valmont says, of its reflexivity, in that it remembers its own past, is that in South Africa at the moment, and we're not having an easy time of it, it reminds us that we used to talk to each other. Because jazz is the first pan-ethnic and non-ethnic music, a music that defied apartheid's ethnic divide and rule, reminds us, through its reference to Mpaqanga, through its reference to Cape Marabi, through its reference to other tonalities and sonic soundscapes, historical soundscapes, that we used to speak to each other. If South African jazz first came into the global public via A.M. Mensah, who's a Ghanaian scholar, what does it mean when 300 Ghanaians have to be helped by their government to leave this country because of xenophobia? So when we listen to jazz and in the wake of slavery, when we check out the remains of the soap suds of like the sea, you're talking to somebody who can't swim, by the way, so I'm being very metaphorical here. What's left over in the waves of the ocean, what traces are heightened by how we signify throughout time, then I think jazz becomes a tone poem, an extension of Duke Ellington's Black, Brown, and Beige, because we're all sitting here in different shades of black, brown, and beige. And what I heard today really was a tone poem that couldn't be reduced to particular kinds of repertoires. All blues now had a different temporal signature. And as Lilivan was playing in All Blues, I was reminded, of course, of Jimmy Cobb's hi-hat that made So What it is. Because So What in kind of blues wouldn't be what it was without Jimmy Cobb's hi-hat. And so as we remember ourselves, with difficulty, with shame sometimes, because we are a shameful lot, we might remind ourselves of the substrate that holds and shapes all these things that make up what we might call the global jazz world. I'm almost done. I don't really know why I'm here. I suspect Morris just likes to keep me busy. But, you know, Mohammed and Valmont and others warned us against talking about performance. There's some odd things on the go, because I don't think performance is finite. And I don't think performance was meant to be a lackadaisical thing. It might be something that marks a particular moment, but it doesn't mark the end of a moment. It allows for ellipsis. And indeed, some of the silences in between the renditions that were being played today were the kind of ellipsis that defied any sense of end and forced us to listen quite differently. And the fact that black music writ large, for us not to talk about jazz, talk about black music writ large, tends to be associated with part of groove, and groove mustn't end, and groove must carry on. What forces us to stop? What happens when we emphasize other things? The discipline that I've seen from these musicians is something that tends to be outside discourses of blackness and Africanness, even though the slave will be disciplined in various ways. Joy and dance were also in this music today, and I think somehow that gets lost. And I think it reminds us of the concept note of this conference, which is to search for what is human in humankind. Thank you for now.
Thank you, Linda. Please jump in, please, and the audience as well. Is there anybody wanting to respond or having a question or comment at this stage? Aiden at the back.
What Valmont told us we shouldn't call music, so I think I'm sitting with that as well in a way. The problem of a preface. I wanted to ask Mohammed, but also the other artists on stage, about the little interlude, the little vernacular sidebar that was the otherwise little snippet. And I'm thinking about that because I'm thinking about this idea of vernacular and the everyday that's been put on the table, and I'm wondering whether there's something there in the intention behind that little interlude, that you're perhaps hinting at something about the everyday, or about, yeah, maybe I'm over intellectualizing it, you can tell me, but yeah.
There was a moment when we were putting this music together, and Mohammed was kind of explaining some of the intention behind it. And otherwise, specifically, popped out as it's a way of kind of breaking ice, if I recall correctly, and finding familiarity, and it kind of pulls to the question of vernacular. But if you're in a really tight boardroom and there's a whole bunch of business speak and business people, and if you're painting that scene, and if you walk in and you see someone, it's like, otherwise, that sense of vernacular is also a sense of welcomeness and being seen. And I think that's the biggest side. Oh yeah, like a big side of relatability in that vernacular is being seen.
Otherwise, thanks for that, Sean. It's a beautiful reminder of the conversations we had over the past couple of days, and that moment. For me, it's really the walk. It's that walk, man. So. Does that answer your question, Aiden?
I think my question sits around, and I suppose it's to the musicians, but also to the room. What does it mean to read sound? Especially in this convening, right? Because sound carries, and I just love Mohammed's response right now, because I think it prefaces my question in a very beautiful way. What does it mean to read sound when sound has always carried so much for oppressed, enslaved, marginalized, indentured communities and peoples? How do we read into that heaviness, into that where sound becomes the carrier of light and hope? In the mines, on the sugarcane plantations, on the cotton plantations, where sound carries both mourning and joy simultaneously. Can we ever even put words to such? So I suppose, yeah, I think it's for the room, it's for the musicians. What does it mean to read sound in this gathering, when sound carries so much, when the sonic is so liberating and binding at the same time.
I mentioned earlier that one of the things that fascinates me about this work, again, trying to locate myself in a place that, a technology of memory, if you like, which is a museum, a 19th century technology of memory, in a way. What does it mean to engage with the sonic beyond the trivial or the ornamental in a place like a museum? And I was able to very briefly work my way through the exhibition yesterday, and it's incredibly rich. I need to go back several times. And there, the question sat with me quite a lot, because I think there's a really deep, serious engagement with the possibilities of sound and what it might do. But there's always this slippage, this inadequacy that a museum institution or a seminar lecture space is going to have when confronted with a question like that, because I think, I mean, we have a sort of rehearsed some of the tropes around what might be the limits or the constraints of that. It is the hierarchy of thought. We privilege the visual. Something like some of the work that Mohammed was doing on the stage and off the stage is a transgression, is a kind of a disruption of the norms and conventions of thought, of the ways in which we perform our public thinking. And so it becomes a very challenging thing. And I think what I guess I want to draw us into a kind of a reflexivity about this exercise, I think, is that one has to work at the boundaries of what has been given, what is the established practice of recuperating thought and the project of thought in a way that we might do here or we might stage in other places. So I guess what I'm saying is there's a very real limit.
Can I help you with that one? Yeah. There's the two kinds of thought for me, no? Just the one that's here. If everyone will just lift your right hand or left, put your thumb here. And then just round and round. The whole day you've been using this one. You feel it. You feel it. Okay? Now I'm not making fun of you. I know you guys are professors and doctors. I'm being for real. I feel it all the time. Went to the exhibition with Sean yesterday. Checked it out. But afterwards I said, hey, Bri, it's a bit here, no? Yeah, it's a bit here. Okay, now just put your hand behind your neck, yeah? So your neck meets your spinal column. Feel that, rub that out. Yeah? That's also another kind of thought. So for me, it's moving between those places in the body, between the thought that packages here and the thought that stores here. The body keeps the score, all that stuff, like it stores it here, so it's vibrational. You can look this up. I've done a bit of reading. When my daughter was going to be born, I bought this book called The Musical Child. It's recommended by Herbie Hancock. I forgot the author's name. I think I read a chapter or two. And then I moved on to The World's Funniest Dad or something like that. It was written by one of the world's funniest dads. And I put The Musical Child down. But what I did learn in The Musical Child was that this cortex here, Mary, what's it? Cerebral cortex. That's my sister. She's a dentist, you know. She's a doctor. I go to her for this kind of information. The cerebral cortex develops early. Those of you who've had children recently will know that around 4 months, kids can hear. We can all hear. We can all perceive our environment. So spatiality and our being in the world manifests in the body prior to our emergence from the womb and prior to air and fire and all those other things as well. Sound is there. Sound resounds in that space. Now, you want to tell me that's not thought? That's so we started the set with nothing remembered. Nothing remembered. I'm working on it. It's from the Quran, Shayan Maktura. See, I even worked on the spelling in the performance. Because, I'm not religious per se. I don't keep my practices. I've developed my own practices, and I'm trying to get closer to the deen, as they say. You found your deen, but you forgot Palestine. What did Drake say last week? Yeah, that's what he said about put this one on the thing, man. But I guess everyone already knows about it, so except you guys. You guys don't have kids? What's going on here? Anyway, I'm trying to find my deen. So nothing remembered. The whole verse is 76:1. No? It says, "Has there not come upon the human being a period of time when he was nothing remembered?" So, and then there's some of the translations that I got on the internet on my brief research escapades. Because this is not brief, by the way. It's not superficial. I grew up Muslim. Mary can attest. Our father was. He became like serious, Yeah, but then he put the gun away and he opened his arms and he loved us. Um, so, but he was a very spiritual person. He was a very spiritual man, and my grandfather also was extremely spiritual, but he didn't pray at all. In fact, I do believe he put the TV up when it's prayer times, just for. Okay, you get the point. There's another I got lots of funny stories about my grandfather that I'd love to tell you. Just to paint the context, I'll tell you one quick one. He was there's these people who are part of what's called the Tablighi Jamaat. The Tablighi Jamaat is sort of Saudi-funded missionaries, in the country. So they come around in a Camry. They always fly in a Camry because you can fit a lot guys in a Camry. Check. Come in a Camry, pull up there. Assalamu alaikum, uncle. We just want to come inside, and I don't know what they say. Anyway, I was young, so they come inside, and they and my grandfather had a shelf of books on the wall. Old ones. You can still the leather bound, like fabric bound books, old books. And these books are all about Islam, and all about spirituality, mysticism, different translations of the Quran. I started reading the newspaper again recently to get my news, and then I remember that he used to read all the newspapers in one day. And I only now know why. Because that's how you own your own truth. You read them all the positions. Anyway, where was the story going? Also, the tablighis and the dogs. So the dogs is another story. The first one is the books on the shelf. He would ask people, "My son," very gently, "My son." You let them in everything, give them tea, water, alles. They're sitting, they're relaxed now, they're ready to spread the word. "My son, see all these books on the wall. When you've read these books, you come see me again." So that was the kind of person he was and character he was. Why did I bring him up?
Because we were talking about how we can't separate sound from thought. We can't say sound.
Oh yeah. So nothing remembered. I think it was intentional to start with that because it's to return to the nothingness that cannot be even remembered.
Valmont, when you said, we kind of need to build a language, I'm here, around jazz and Cape Town, and there's a kind of a the audience also has a language of understanding, so they'll respond in a certain way. And I come from a context where not being in this sort of, you almost said inner circle, Cape Town, how you know how to respond to jazz music, see it as quite highbrow, as kind of something which I find is the opposite of feeling included. And so in writing about this language, to explain or talk about jazz in Cape Town, I was wondering how you would respond to someone saying, I actually think of it as otherwise. It's almost a bit intimidating in kind of arriving in a gig in Cape Town where there's jazz and the audience already knows how to respond. It's quite insular in a way. And so I don't know how you would respond to that. How does one read jazz in a way, how you talk of it, and having a different experience?
Right. This is the big fight. Curators, musicians. I always say, if you want to end a party, call a musicologist. I'm a musicologist. So, first of all, I think this is a brilliant question. And I'm going to tackle it with the tools I have. And I think we all have different tools with which to tackle this thing. Valmont will speak about how he and I have been thinking out of Cape Town, thinking of the broader Cape. Because to say Cape Town is already an insular gesture in particular ways in South African history. So we've got a problem with that. I don't think there's anything like Cape Jazz. He disagrees with me. But that's the beauty of it. That's the unfinished conversation. So for me, when we go back to Otherwise, when we go back to that dialogue, I was thinking of those old recordings of Kwela, where before the penny whistles get going, is Kwela, Kwela, Bafana, blah, 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 blah. I couldn't understand the Kwela penny whistlers, and I couldn't understand what my friends were saying on stage today, because I am a nerd. But I was thinking about to tune, how that word morphs in South African language. I'm going to tune you. Don't tune me, but to tune up, to be in tune, to be off tune, to be out of tune. And the idea that even when somebody's telling you things that can't be on camera, they're doing it with a kind of artistry. They're rapping at you. They're tuning you. It's not just a one-word significant finger. There's something on the go there. So already that is the reinstallation of the popular, that particular kinds of jazz would disdain, that particular kinds of jazz lovers would wish to be off the stage, for those memories of the popular to be gone. When Mohammed, if I heard correctly, was talking about milk and bread, let's not forget, of course, the mother genre of South African jazz, which is mbaqanga, which was also known as fast food, which is named after a kind of bread, where when it became captured by the music industry, it became the musician's daily bread. So there's no way, once we fight against the reification of this music, which is the valorization and reification of blackness in particular ways, such that it is rendered palatable for the creation and construction of particular kinds of histories, we need to remember the bread and the milk. We need to remember those Kwela penny whistlers. We need to remember mbaqanga, with which the band concluded their offering today. So when you enter a particular kind of jazz event in a particular kind of venue, remember not everyone is present. And that remembering takes us, for me, again, this is a musicological thing, my kind of musicological thing, that Mohammed is saying, well, what happens to what is not remembered? That beginning, that hesitancy, that stepping into a particular kind of discursive realm. This is why, with Siseko talking about what about sound, I get nervous with the mystification. Sound is a signifying system, much like other signifying systems. Words are just as weighted. What the tools that were visited upon the enslaved or the otherwise exploited were the cornucopia. Poetry is just as weighted. Painting, puppets, the sensorium. I didn't wake up early enough, forgive me. But I understand that, it was a whole orgy, excess of oppression. If we allow ourselves to be overwhelmed by sound and we do not talk about sound, then we leave something out. And yet again, not everything is present. So for me, as difficult as it is, we will always fail as humanities scholars. We must fail so that we can continue to talk. We must fail differently, we must fail together. So we will never be okay. No musicologist will ever be a musician unless they're George E. Lewis, bless him. But if you're a musicologist, maybe you don't want to be a musician. Maybe I have the privilege and the blessing to listen to this and then to bore everybody else in the wake of a beautiful performance by talking through how it might signify and how words might link us together beyond what might otherwise overwhelm us.
Thank you, Lindelwa. I'm not sure where we are without time, but no. You can carry on. I think what I want to say in response maybe is again posing as a problem or a question, because I think there is that kind of dynamic in the jazzing world as it is now. I want to stage it as a problem again, to draw it back to the prompt of the exhibition and the conversation about In the Wake, about how do we discern the different, how do we distinguish between what one might call the kind of the practices of opacity that black subjects produce as a way to survive and to humanize themselves. So throughout you're thinking of capoeira, of mothers teaching or reading the Quran to their children on the slopes of Table Mountain. There's always a practice of that goes even beyond self-preservation to humanization. And those practices need to, by their very nature, sometimes be opaque, so that they can survive and that they can flourish. And so there's that part of jazz, or a lot of black music. Anywhere where there's been a slave experience, there's been this practice of opacity for humanization and for self-preservation. So there's that on the one hand, and it's a kind of practice that emerges or that morphs with different contexts in which you might find yourself. And then there is, I think, the very real and very dangerous appropriation and commodification pressure that again is always there on black music, and it is the very story of black music. And I think it's something, you look at all the boutique festivals that are emerging, they are complex, and it's not about condemning them, but about understanding the practice of commodification that is constantly at play in this work. So you're right, there is a sense of alienation that people feel in audiences, but I think our work is to sharpen our critical language so we can make the judgments about how to move beyond those, and in a sense to support the humanization efforts that are implied. Lee, are we finished time-wise?
I don't want to say, but if there's anyone on the stage who would like to have a last word.
Yeah, I guess I just want to talk back on reading the music. Sound exists outside of the page. The page is like words, a reflection of what someone's trying to express. And these things are passed down. So in the same way, I mean, you've asked about being familiar with the music. These things are passed down, and the audience travels with the musician. There's generally, except in this day and age where we're all trying to access the international wherever we go, things were based around community. So even the language of the music was passed on from musician to musician, and through the community is also growing with the music that is changing. And I think that's something that we do lose when we try to cater to everyone. And I think there is also a sense of onus on the audience to educate themselves on music that they enjoy, and understanding what you do enjoy and what you don't enjoy. And it's not a sin to not like jazz. It's like, but it does boil down to taste and language, and the language of jazz as instrumental music is also quite abstract, and everyone's got their own interpretations of it. And maybe you've heard jazz you don't like, but going out to listen to different people and what they do, because also the depth of the music is different. Some people make jazz that is super light and happy and chill and not much depth in terms of historical value. And that's cool. That's also cool. But the stuff that does get you going, and in different ways, I've got jazz that is influenced by musicians from Africa, from India, from South America, from Europe, there's good jazz, and I've happened to be exposed to a lot of different styles, but that's only limited to what my worldview is. There's stuff I haven't been exposed to, and likewise, everything that each musician or artist is exposed to is what informs their language in that context.
Big hand for Lilivan Gangat, Sean Sanby, Mohammed Dawjee, and the trio. Thank you very much.